Yeah. I have to see. First of all. That's it at 67.
Okay, Dennis, why don't we get started?
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Galucki, and welcome to the 491st Imagine Greater Buffalo program and our 113th virtual program hosted by our wonderful and treasured downtown Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Now, thank you for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or C-SAAHN as I pronounce the acronym, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and their YouTube channel. And we certainly hope you share the link with others. Now on to our featured speaker, Justin Booth. Justin is an expert in creating livable streets and vibrant communities. He founded and directs Go Bike Buffalo, Buffalo's bicycle advocacy organization, and also chairs the city's Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board. He has authored numerous policy and planning documents addressing livability and bicycle pedestrian infrastructure and access, and has helped communities across New York and beyond examine, critique, and plan for streets that increase activity and safety for all users. He has extensive experience with the City of Buffalo and New York State Department of Transportation policy and procedure, and was a leading force in the passage of city, county, and statewide policies for complete streets. Justin has authored or co-authored numerous policy and local planning documents addressing livability and people-first designs, and has provided expertise in the development of Buffalo's Green Code. Justin also serves as the chair of the Common Council's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board. He is a member of many regional and statewide working groups and task forces for more livable and accessible communities across the state. So now, folks, let's welcome Justin Booth. Justin, take it away.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me here today and for all of you joining. Give me 1 second while I pull up my presentation. Okay, you shall see this. So as Dennis mentioned, Justin Booth, I'm the executive director at GoBike, the founding executive director. And our work here in the city of Buffalo, which started back in 2008, has now expanded across Western New York. We have projects as far north as the city of Niagara Falls, and as far as south with the Seneca Nation down in Cattaraugus County. Our mission is to promote active mobility, trails and greenways and complete streets in Western New York. Our goal is to get more people to be active as part of their daily routine, making it safe and accessible so people can walk and bike. And have better access to public transit. And we do this by connecting and empowering communities through advocacy, education, planning, and engagement. Many times when we start these conversations, what are complete streets? And I think it's important, this is the definition from Smart Growth America, which houses the National Complete Streets Coalition. But in context, what we have done for many decades now is design our streets with one purpose in mind, and that's how quickly we can move motor vehicles from point A to point B. And that has had negative impacts on our communities and the places that we live. We know nationally that 72% of all trips are within a mile or less. A mile is a very easy walking distance, and the Surgeon General actually recommends to get 30 minutes of physical activity a day. A simple walk to the grocery store or for your daily needs, 15 minutes is that mile walk there and back, and you're getting that minimum amount. And so my background is in public health and came at this from a public health perspective, because we recognize that for people to maintain their health and the benefits for that, we need to design our environments in a way that allows it to happen and happen safely. This has been important because we know that the cost of physical inactivity and people being overweight and obese is significant in New York State. Many times when we talk about complete streets, there isn't, oftentimes an extra cost, if not sometimes a minimal extra cost. But we know that with 1 in 3 children in New York State being considered overweight and obese, that is costing New York State $327 million annually in direct and indirect medical costs. And that jumps to $11.8 billion when we start talking about adults. And this was back from 2011. We know that those costs have continued to rise. This is also an equity issue. According to AAA, the average cost of owning and operating a vehicle is over $10,000 a year. And so if you're making minimum wage, or you're only making, just a median income, this is a significant portion of your household income, and could certainly be spent in other places. There is a study done by CEO for Cities that looked at the city of Portland, Oregon, which is considered one of the most bike-friendly cities in the country, but also exhibits great pedestrian and transit access. They've been able to demonstrate that people living in the metro Portland area drive more miles less than other people living in other US metro areas, and have been able to show that they're able to put back over $1 billion a year because people are not having to spend that money on transportation costs. And one of the reasons why they like to highlight the fact that they have the most microbreweries per capita, for putting money back in people's pockets. Here in Buffalo, we know that it's having an impact on our environment. We are in a sprawled region. While population growth has continued to decline, we have seen 175% increase in traffic delay because we're seeing more people using their vehicles for their everyday trips, and owning more vehicles per household, and living farther away from whether it be school or work or other cases. And this is, of course, a significant contributing factor to greenhouse gas emissions. Whether we're talking about here in Erie County, New York State, or across the country, transportation is the largest sector contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. And a big portion of that is largely due to driving by ourselves for a lot of our everyday trips, particularly those 1 mile trips. And while we do have laws on the books that say, vehicles must yield to pedestrians in the crosswalks, this is why we put those signs up there to be our cannon fodder. We know that not every driver is following all the rules of the road, and it's important to make sure that we design our roadways to be safe. And when we talk about how do we make our streets safe, the number one component of that is making sure that drivers drive the speed limit and the posted speed limit, because with increased speed, you have a higher likelihood of injury or death. Here in Erie and Niagara County, while only about 3% of total traffic crashes are bicyclists and pedestrians, they represent over 25% of all injuries and fatalities upon our roadways. And so making sure that we are designing our streets to be safe and accessible so people can, if they choose to, or out of circumstance have to, walk or bike or take public transit, they do so without having to put their lives at risk. So when we talk about complete streets, it's really about having a large impact on a number of our quality of life elements that many of us hold so dear, whether it be safety, equity, health, mobility. It's really about designing our roadways for all people, all ages, and all abilities. So this is a image of Buffalo's Lower West Side. If you're familiar with the area, the parking lot on the upper left is for Hutch High School. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a transformation of this intersection, a number of locations. Many of our corridors, as I mentioned, have been designed for the quick movement of vehicles. Federal Highway Administration says that you can have travel lanes as narrow as 10 feet. Many of the travel lanes in the city of Buffalo, or even in new projects, are 11 feet. But here's a situation in many of the Lower West Side neighborhoods. Many of the corridors have been turned into one way. And this street, West Chippewa, as it turns into Georgia, you have 36 feet from curb to curb and alternate side of the street parking, which essentially provides you a 28-foot travel lane. Double the size that you need, and of course, the wider the travel lane, we know the higher speeds of vehicles on those corridors. And so sometimes, and many times, complete streets can often just be a function of paint and reallocating the space on our streets to make sure that it still has the efficient flow of vehicles, but at the same time can also make it safe for others to use that corridor. Winter time is great because when we have some snow on the ground, you can see where the vehicles are actually traveling and what the different space needs are for vehicles, and what other asphalt is excess and could potentially be removed or reallocated from that space to make it safer. Here is an example of a temporary project that we delivered at this intersection. Again, the bump outs were just painted. We used temporary bollards to block cars, although you can see in the upper left, the car still wind up squeezing in there close to the crosswalk. It is illegal in the city of Buffalo, I think most municipalities, to park within 20 feet of a crosswalk for sightline issues. Whether for a pedestrian to cross, for a vehicle to be able to see a pedestrian in the crosswalk, but also to see for other oncoming vehicles. You cannot park within 20 feet. And so these bump outs really just define the spaces that are currently illegal to park in anyway, narrowing the travel lanes down and reducing those crossing distances for pedestrians. When Go Bike does these projects, we take a look at what is the existing conditions, what are the demographics of the neighborhood, what are the current traffic volumes. We also do bicycle and pedestrian counts. And we do that pre and post to determine what has happened in that corridor. And at this location in particular, because it's right adjacent to a high school, there were over 1,000 pedestrians a day at this intersection, which maintained even on the weekends when school was not in session, compared to there's about 1,100 vehicles per day. There was about 100 cyclists per day, so you have just as many non-motorized users at this location as you did motor vehicles. However, the corridor was just designed for vehicles. And so our goal is, again, for us to do a treatment like this, it costs around $2,000 as part of our public engagement process. And it also, if the city was to go in and make this permanent, using, looking at designs, going through public outreach process, many people don't come to it with a language like, what is a bump out, or what is the widths that need to be put in place? We like to create these tangible projects. For us, an intersection costs around $2,000 to implement. If the city was to come in and make something like this permanent, it costs about $200,000 per intersection. So our goal is, how do we deliver temporary projects, use it as a public engagement process, providing people with tangible experiences so they can demonstrate how it works or how it may not work, to make those final changes before we make that longer term investment. Here is an example of a project we did in the city of Lackawanna. This was a housing development that was adjacent to Taggart Playground. We partnered with the Mount Olive Baptist Church and their summer program that was happening, which you cannot see probably very well, is inside these bump out areas. We actually work with some of the local kids to do some public art in them. And so it was really engaging the neighborhood in that process to deliver this project. Those temporary curbs actually is made by a company in Lockport called Rubber Form, where they recycle old car tires and create a number of temporary traffic calming products that are sold and used by cities across the country. But again, a very effective way for us to immediately make some of these design improvements at intersections and corridors to demonstrate how they work and to engage the community in delivering them. Here is another project we did in the city of Lackawanna. This was during the height of the pandemic in 2020. And the city actually came to us and said, one of their biggest concerns, they had some restaurants on Ridge Road. Outdoor dining was not really feasible for them because you have a lot of motor vehicles on that corridor. In addition to large tractor trailers making so much noise that you can't hear the person talking to you standing right next to you. And so they had just completed a traffic study showing that the road had excess capacity, and that it can be narrowed down to one lane in each direction. And so with that traffic study in hand, we took a look at how do we reallocate that space between the curbs and deliver a temporary project. What was approved by the city council, again, as you can see, we went from one lane to one lane each direction, but we utilized that extra space to create a protected bike lane, a two-way protected bike lane on the north side of the street. Why protected? What we know is that there's different categories for cyclists. Someone like myself or Dennis, who ride every single day, we're kind of in the 1% category, the strong and fearless. It doesn't matter if there's a bike lane on the street or not. We're going to be out there and riding. We choose to ride on a regular basis, and we'll be kind of what's called your vehicular cyclist. 8% of the population interested but concerned, 8% of the population, they are really focused on, having a bike lane in place, having that dedicated space, works for them. But, combined, we're only pushing to about 9% of the population. There's certainly a group that will never ride a bike, which is fine, but there's about 60% of the population categorized as interested but concerned. This is typically your families. This is myself when I'm riding with my daughter. This is women, this is children. And what we've seen is not only does a protected bike lane get more people out there riding, particularly when it connects to meaningful destinations, but it also has shown, where implemented, to increase sales tax revenue to the surrounding businesses, to reduce crashes on the corridor by upwards of 90%. So it is really, when you talk to most people, they say they don't ride either because of the weather or because they don't feel safe with car traffic. And so a protected bike lane and a temporary protected bike lane is what was implemented along the street. The pre and post assessment showed that it worked. We saw a 275% increase in cyclists along that corridor. However, the public in general was not supportive. Only about 20% supported the project, but the number one complaint and the resounding theme that we did receive, and why the project was not expanded upon, was because most drivers felt that they had to slow down and pay attention to other users on the roadway, which is why they didn't like it, which was the exact reason why we implemented that project. So sometimes these types of designs just don't work, but again, which is why we like to do the temporary projects, to engage people in these conversations and trust that they will get out there and use it, so they can have their own experiences to talk about it. We did a similar project this past year in collaboration with the city of Buffalo on Forest Avenue. Again, we've hit some opposition from some residents there. There's about a 200-person petition against the temporary project when it was installed this past summer. But we have over 1,000 people that have responded saying they support it. And this picture was sent by a mother with her 9-year-old daughter saying thank you, because this is the first time that she felt comfortable having her child ride in the street, because they were physically separated from traffic. What's also important to note, in Forest Avenue specifically, we do a speed study for these projects, both pre and post. We found that the 85th percentile, or essentially the average speed of vehicles on that corridor, was around 20 or 35 miles per hour. And what you saw earlier, the faster you're going, obviously pushing up to 40, your chance of survival significantly is reduced. And so, excuse me, after installation, simply by using the paint, narrowing the travel lanes down, bumping out the intersections a little bit, we were able to show a decrease in the average vehicle speed down to 27 miles per hour, which could save someone's life. So simply an effect of paint really does a lot to curb driver behavior and get them driving the speed limit. Another project we did in Niagara Falls, and this one I really like showing because it shows the opportunity to include public art in these projects. Some cities are allowing public art to be in the entire intersection, including the crosswalks. What we have been working with many of the municipalities here in Western New York is any unique pedestrian space, because it's now designated as pedestrian space, can include public art. So this project really focused on slowing vehicle speeds down. If you're continued down the screen, that is the street Monteagle and Chasm, are the two streets there that come into the intersection. It is essentially the east-west route connecting the entire city to the new parkway that was installed after the removal of the Robert Moses Parkway. If anyone remembers how that used to be at all these streets, they used to dead end, and there was a chain link fence with barbed wire on it to keep people away from the Robert Moses Parkway and separating the entire community from the actual gorge itself. So with the removal of the parkway, the next step is, of course, how do we provide safe access to residents to better access the gorge and all the great amenities and parkland that now has been restored there. Again, this is another simple bump out project that we did on the medical campus, and working with the Albright Knox and with the B&MC, we did a number of these bump outs, temporary bump outs along Ellicott Street And here's one where the artist was actually installing the project. There is Bloomberg did a whole report on asphalt art, again demonstrating that not only does these traffic calming designs work in improving safety, but the addition of public art actually also increases the safety and the reduction of crashes at these locations. And so ultimately, when we talk about complete streets, I think sometimes people always think about go bike and all we're looking to do is put in bike lanes. But number one focus, no matter what community we're going to, is listening to the community, what their number one concerns are. And what a resounding theme that we always hear is the need to slow vehicle speeds down. Once we slow vehicle speeds down through design, how do we reallocate that space? And how can we do it effectively and efficiently to make immediate safety improvements in our communities, to have all those positive quality of life benefits that we know complete streets can have for our communities. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. And I guess I'll turn it back over to Dennis Melissa to facilitate any questions.
And that's just what we're going to do. Well done, Justin. And a great image here to leave us with the artwork of safety, if you will. Question I have, what is the maximum speed in a city like Buffalo? Is it 30 miles an hour or 35?
Yeah, so most speed limits, all speed limits in the city of Buffalo are 30 miles per hour. Actually, the state legislature just passed legislation allowing municipalities to reduce their speed limits to 25 miles per hour if they so choose. The only time that you're going to see a lower speed limit than 30 miles per hour is in a school zone, and there's flexibility that speed limit can be anywhere between 15 to 20 miles per hour. But yeah, I would say 98% of your local streets here in Buffalo and Western New York are going to have a 30 mile per hour speed limit. Well,
and the reason I asked that is what you're really doing is helping people drive within the speed limit. And my question is, since you had quite a few negative complaints from drivers that felt they had to slow down and be conscious of bicyclists, enforcement is one of the both easiest and probably most difficult aspect, but realistically the cheapest way to accomplish the goals. Your goals are really to get the word out that people going over 30 miles an hour are causing this higher number of deaths often, and are going above the speed limit. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I think let me clarify that a little bit. I think one is, when we talk to law enforcement agencies, whether it's in Buffalo, Niagara Falls, or elsewhere, there's traffic safety and speeding concerns in every single street, in every single block, in every single neighborhood. And there'll never be enough police enforcement to curb all the bad drivers out there, essentially. That also being, that being said, what we have been hearing from a lot of our Black and brown peers across the country, and of course locally, if you are driving a motor vehicle and you're a person of color, you have a 40% higher likelihood of experiencing violence at the hands of police at a traffic stop. So the goal is, how do we reduce the need for police in enforcement activities? And we know that design could be so much more effective. It's kind of what we've seen a lot of studies show is the 80-20 rule. So if you design a street appropriately, 80% of the drivers will respond appropriately, and they'll only be about 20%. Whereas if you don't have the street designed appropriately, 80% of the people will drive more fast or more quickly through that location. So, the goal here is we can do a lot more with design. No one likes getting pulled over by the police. No one wants to pay that ticket. And so we can design our streets to facilitate the right behavior. And so it's automatic. We're going to be so much more effective.
Rather than enforcement, what I was thinking is creating the publicity around awareness, so that the culture of Buffalo wants to drive slower because it is a complete street for pedestrians, bicyclists, automobiles, trucks, the buses, the whole bit. And your Delaware Avenue work that you've done, which you didn't show here, is a perfect example. No need for restraints, just a bicycle lane, but taking a 4-lane road and dropping it down to 3 with a single direction in each way, and then a middle turning lane, which suddenly allowed everybody to make left-hand turns that prior to that were illegal on Delaware. So the traffic goes slower but smoother. In a sense, it goes closer to the speed limit than it sure did when you had a 4-lane road going right through the middle of the city.
We also found on Delaware Avenue, that's a good point, Dennis, is that by doing what we call a road diet, the 4-lane to 3-lane conversion, you can actually, not only are cars going to the speed limit, but you can actually move cars more effectively and efficiently through that corridor because they are not speeding. And so we've actually seen traffic volumes increase on corridors like Delaware Avenue because after they've had a road diet, because it is such an effective way to move vehicles more effectively and efficiently and safely through a space.
Yep, good examples. All right, Melissa, do we have questions from the audience?
We do have several questions.
Good.
I also see someone whose hand is raised. So if your hand is raised, I suggest you put your question in the chat and we will get to as many as we can. First question, how do we get the city to maintain and plow the bike lanes?
Oh, that is a very good question. One of the things is, so Naga Street is the city's first 2-way protected bike lane that was designed intentionally to allow for their existing snow removal equipment to drive down it. I would say that it has taken some of the local business owners, Vision Niagara, Campus Woolworks, which is now located on the corridor, and others. We've certainly put some posts out there to use 311 as a reminder for them to do so. And I would say that that has been working and they've been better at getting out there and doing it. But as Dennis mentioned, this is culture change. And of course, this is not going to happen overnight. And we're going to have to continue to engage and encourage the city to make sure that they are making our bike lanes clear throughout all seasons, because I rode my bike today. I never believe it's bad weather, just bad attire. And we've seen many countries around the world, and even here in the United States, Minneapolis, Minnesota, are good examples of places where, they do clear the bike lanes effectively and efficiently. And, people continue to ride year round because they are maintained. And so that's something that we still needed. I would encourage anyone who's a regular cyclist and cares about this, whenever you see a bike lane with snow in it, please call 311 and make the city aware of it.
Thank you. Next question. Following up on talks about the 198, how do you imagine or envision the redesign?
Well, the 198 is a good example of a process that had prioritized the movement of vehicles and movement of vehicles, solely the movement of vehicles previously. It only looked at the traffic study, only looked at the on and off ramps, didn't look around at the impacts of the surrounding neighborhoods. It didn't look at the way people were currently utilizing that corridor and the barriers that corridor created to some segments of the population. Which is why I should say the Scotiabank Corridor Coalition was brought together, and which is why the project that was being pushed by the Department of Transportation, the New York State Department of Transportation, was stopped. The most recent process does not prioritize the movement of vehicles. It includes the movement of vehicles, but it also has a number of other metrics, from equity to health to community safety and other elements. And what we're seeing through that process is no longer a petition to stop a bad project, but a petition in favor of the project that has been, or the scenarios that have been presented to the public by the Greater Buffalo Niagara Transportation Council. So it has really been, looking at the process that it thinks about all users, all people, and we're having conversations now about, one lane in each direction, being able to cross the street, reconnecting the two halves of the park again, disconnecting the 198 from the 190, revitalizing, Agassiz Circle. So there's a lot of really exciting elements. And if we have a process that thinks about all elements of our community and not just prioritizing moving cars from point A to point B, we can still move a lot of people through that corridor, but we don't have to do it at the detriment of the people that are surrounding that corridor and surrounding communities there.
And another question, what do you think can be done with Forest Avenue now, as it's a constant mess, as this person calls it?
Agreed. Well, I should say that the city was successful in securing federal dollars to extend the existing bike path, which is off-road, a protected multi-use pathway, which currently right now wraps around Buffalo State and kind of ends at Elmwood and Forest, and then kind of heads west towards Richmond and ends at Richmond. They are looking to extend that to Reese Street, and they have, my understanding is that they've hired a consultant on board to look at the work that we've done, the pre and post assessments, and the data analysis that we've conducted through the temporary project, to look at what is possible going further west to connect it to Niagara Street, which is the city's new protected bike lane. It's also part of the Empire State Trail, and is going seeing significant amounts of cyclists moving through there, as well as looking at the connection going east from Forest and Elmwood all the way to Delaware Avenue, where obviously you have connectivity to not only the Olmsted Parks and Parkway, but Forest Lawn Cemetery and some other destinations over there, and to the existing bike facilities that were just installed this past year on Delaware Avenue. So a big goal that we have been pushing the city on, and partnering with groups like the East Side Bike Club, is that we have a lot of north-south connections in the city of Buffalo. We don't have any really good east-west connections. And so in our mind, Forest Avenue seems to be a really great opportunity to, connect people from Niagara Street to Delaware Avenue and screw them up over to Delavan, and then Delavan, they can continue east from there, all the way out to Bailey. And there's a ton of other work that I could spend another half hour talking about that's happening out in the east side of Buffalo.
We do just have a few more questions if you're still okay on time.
We're going to go over a little bit because this is a valuable conversation, I think.
So you mentioned the bump outs. How are those received by the Department of Public Works regarding snow plowing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I should say I wear another hat. I'm and I'll tie this back together, I promise. I'm a member of IATSE Local 10. We're the stagehand union that sets up for concerts and Broadway shows at Shays and at the arena and whatnot. And I'm a rigger. And one of my rigging partners is a gentleman who actually drives a snowplow for the city of Buffalo as his day job. And we've had many conversations about this. He has, as a snowplow driver, has felt that it's sometimes a little more challenging for them to get around, particularly when they're brand new. But some of our most recent conversations, he has said, like, it's taken a little while to get used to them, to maneuver their plows around them, but fully supports them and thinks they're great. So while, again, culture, it was a bit of a culture change to adjust to snowplow drivers and to do it better. I've had, regular conversations with one of the snowplow drivers saying that, like, after, it's taken us a season or so to get used to them, but now it's not an issue for us to get around them. And because they have so many positive benefits in terms of reducing crossing distances for pedestrians and, slowing vehicles down at the intersections, there's so many positive things to it. I don't know what the number is just this year yet, but last year, just to figure, to think about how many times did we need to actually send snow plows out into the street to remove snow. It was only 14 days last season. Now this season we've had a very challenging winter in some respects, but it's also, we haven't had, the snow hasn't lasted for a very long time. So, I guess the question sometimes goes back to, are we designing our streets for the, the snow events that we see and are seeing less and less of consistently throughout the season? Or we're designing our streets to be safe for the other 95% of the time where we're having people, walking through them. And so this is a values choice that we need to make as a community. And I would say that, when I first started this, when I first met Dennis, there's maybe only 1 or 2 locations in the city of Buffalo where there was bump outs at intersections. And now we're seeing it fairly regularly on many projects as a traffic calming element and a pedestrian safety treatment regularly to many projects.
And this is a different comment. As a driver, there are times that I feel that bike riders are dangerously close to cars. Have there been many accidents?
Yeah, I mean, and this is where having that dedicated space certainly makes it easier, safer for both, and to make drivers aware. I mean, I own a car. I do also drive. Many states have passed a law called the 3-foot law, basically saying that as a driver, whether or not there's a bike lane or not, that you need to give a cyclist 3 feet berth to go around them to make sure that there isn't any safety issues there. New York State has not passed that yet. There is conversations of a safe passing law in New York State, but you're absolutely right. I certainly agree that if there isn't designated space, how do we make sure that there is enough passing room for cars on that space? And as a cyclist, following the rules of the road as well. And so I think it takes all users on the roadway, drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, to exhibit those right behaviors. And with the absence of design, we know that it's the correct design. It's often left to each individual user to make the appropriate decisions in the certain circumstances that arise. So it's something that we all need to certainly do a better job working on. But I certainly am a strong opponent for a safe passing law, and until we have all the infrastructure in place to make our roadways safe and to delineate those spaces for the different users.
And the next one is just a comment, but I want to share it. It's very interesting and informative. I much better understand the need for bicycle lane accessibility to transform and benefit our community. So sharing that. And just one last question. I'm wondering what the city's response will be to low public support for the temporary lane drop and protected bicycle lanes, particularly if by their own volition, their dislike of the changes stems from needing to pay more attention to other road users.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I'll keep going back to the need for culture change. We are not going to, no city's been able to build themselves out of congestion. Not that we necessarily have congestion here in Buffalo and Western New York. We know that, transportation and private vehicles, are a large contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And we also know that the answer is not giving everyone an electric vehicle because that's going to be very expensive. We don't have the infrastructure in place for that either yet. There's a lot of components that still need to be in place to make that happen, which of course is not going to solve some of the safety concerns on the roadways. So, we have seen places, I think the city that really stands out as the place where a lot of this started was, of course, in Amsterdam and the Dutch. They started in the 1960s. There was a lot more vehicles on their streets back then, and essentially what happened was many people and children particularly were getting killed on their roadways. And so it was a whole movement to change the culture in the country, in that city, to make their streets safer for all users. And what we see today is a city where it is easier to walk and to ride a bike than it is to drive, where a majority of the population choose walking, cycling, or public transit over personal automobile use. And it's going to take a while for, that's been going on since the late 60s. It's going to take, we here in Buffalo are only maybe, 10 to 15 years into this culture shift. They are certainly have a leg up on us. It's going to take a consistent, concerted effort to think about these things. And there's simple aspects of the way even some of our policies set up. Right now it is less expensive to pay for a monthly parking pass in downtown Buffalo than it is for a monthly transit pass. Why would we expect anyone to take public transit if it's going to be cheaper for you to drive? And so some of those very simple policy aspects is part of the culture change that needs to happen. Buffalo has done a great job with the adoption of the Green Code, which eliminated minimum parking requirements for new buildings and establishing a transportation demand management policy that basically says that you need to show, at least in downtown, a 20% reduction of vehicle trips to any new builds. But implementation of that policy, making sure that there's bike racks at all buildings, both inside and long-term inside for people, making sure that the sidewalks are clear of snow in the wintertime so you can access the bus. I mean, there are some, basic needs that need to be established and basic maintenance issues that need to be addressed before we start seeing, I think, a larger cultural shift. But I think from a policy perspective and movement, Buffalo is certainly moving in the right direction and picking up a lot of cues from what we're seeing from other cities. I will say that, an example of this is the city this year has $1 million striping budget, which may not sound exciting, but the last 2 years was only about $224,000, and the previous history, it was zero. Streets would not get restriped unless they were repaved, and repaving only happens every 10 to 15 years. And so we count $1 million striping budget as a huge win, not only to just for simple places like when we did the Forest Avenue project, there wasn't even a double yellow line on the street to make sure those are maintained, let alone crosswalks and bike lanes. And so this culture shift is going to continue to take time, but I feel that we are collectively on the right track and look forward to seeing all of you that are participating today or listening to this to, join us in this this movement to make sure we can all be, active and get to our daily destinations without any fear of our, danger or putting our lives in our hands just by, the simple act of trying to cross the street. So, thank you.
Good way to end it right there, Justin. My hat's off to you. It does go back to at least the late 90s. That's when I got involved for 4 years with the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Group. And you've made it come a long way to make it happen. And just that last stat of having $1 million budget for striping when there was none before. I mean, and this wonderful image that you're showing, that money then allows us to be creative. It's a flat area we live in. It makes bicycling and walking a lot easier than some of the hilly towns that are our neighbors to the east and certainly in other parts of the country. So we'll leave it there. Justin, thank you. And folks, thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to hopefully see you back here next week when we have an author and historian, Rick Falkowski. He's going to be looking at important people actually in transportation in the Buffalo area at the beginning of the 1900s, dealing with bicycles and cars and airplanes, actually. So it's a book that he's written, and we're going to hear more about it next Tuesday. So join us then. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well and good day.